Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Boruto manga speculation video. This is going to be my speculation ahead of chapter 80, which will be coming out on April 20th. So yes, we're still like 2.5 weeks away from the chapter, but it was a very, very important chapter that we got with chapter 79. So the setup is really strong ahead of this chapter, which is going to be important to, I suppose, show us, like, in a way, I suppose, the trajectory for how long until we actually get to the time skip, how much of this pre-time skip stuff are we focusing on, and there's a lot to just, like, establish here because Chapter 79 changed things so much. So let's get into it here. Of course, massive chapter, huge twist. It changes the entire status quo of the whole series, quite literally. Boruto and Kawaki have effectively swapped lives, and this has happened via the omniscience Shinjutsu power from Shibai, and this has basically changed the memories of nearly every character to view Kawaki as Boruto and Boruto as Kawaki. So a very complex situation here, because obviously it changes so much, and you wonder, like, okay, there's the obvious thing of Kawaki was being chased by the entire village, so this now switched to Boruto's being chased by the entire village. So the hero of the show has now become the outcast, and that's a huge switch up. And we know that this, and obviously this is how we get to flash forward from chapter 1, episode 1, of Boruto kind of on his own in the future, why he sort of arrives at the village to fight Kawaki. It establishes to some degree why that situation is the way it is. So a lot of important stuff beginning to come together. First of all, I think we have to address sort of like who's where with regards to who was affected, immune, and who do we have questions about. So because of that, it is best to focus on the characters who are not affected rather than trying to cover a list of who is affected. Because it is the immune characters who are going to be the more interesting ones in this ultimately. So we obviously start off. Boruto is immune. The reason he is immune is because, one, he is Otsutsuki. Secondly, I assume because he is one of the characters involved in the big switch as well, it sort of alters things as well. Now, to be fair, I suppose if Kawaki had changed places with someone else that wasn't Otsutsuki, would, like, Boruto theoretically, if Boruto wasn't Otsutsuki, would he, like, literally consider himself to be Kawaki? And only the fact that he is Otsutsuki and knows what has happened that makes the situation so bad. But either way, the main point here, he's immune because of Otsutsuki. Kawaki, similarly, for the same reasons. He's Otsutsuki, he is one of the characters involved in this big switch up, and he is sort of partly the caster of this kind of use of omniscience, because it was obviously Ada and Kawaki in sort of contact with each other that activated this power. And the reason it happened on such a large scale is because, I suppose, effectively it is almost Ada's minor use of the skill combined with Kawaki's Otsutsuki-ness that made it the full kind of scope of the power here. Similarly, Ada is immune because she is a caster, but also we assume because she has the sort of quote-unquote Shibai DNA, which is where she got the power in the first place. Also, the fact that the power happens to be, like, literally, like, the god ability of god abilities, the one that is literally called omnipotence, speaks to the idea of, like, yeah, I guess you would be immune from that yourself. Now, Demon is interesting because he's pictured in the manga page where they show the sort of immune characters where it's discussed, but there's not really any, like, particularly obvious reason why this is the case, but we have to assume that the rules from her charm ability still apply. So that didn't work on Otsutsuki, and it also didn't work on blood relatives, and of course Demon is her brother, so I guess now that it's not the sort of romance kind of based ability, because it is more of just a god ability, I'm guessing it just also doesn't work on, members of your own family. So that means, of course, yeah, Ada's family is not impacted. And then also we assume that because Demon has also a Shibai ability with the whole reflection ability, that because, again, that means, like, even though he's not Otsutsuki as such, because he has, like, a god Otsutsuki power, that might be another kind of aspect to this as well. But he's clearly pictured as being someone who is in the immune category. It would be very, very, very weird if they had like Kawaki, Ada, and Demon as sort of the main trio who sort of are always together, and Demon just happens to like be someone who thinks like Kawaki is Boruto instead of knowing the truth. So there's that weirdness to it, like, as well, of course. Sarda ends up being actually like the only other character who is like full on officially confirmed to be immune. Now there are other characters which we'll get into after this, but the reason exactly for this is unclear. They've never directly said why Sarda was immune from the charm ability, and now with this kind of stronger ability, why she is still immune. To me, the Uchiha heritage is still the most likely theory for this. That being that the Uchiha clan ultimately links all the way back to direct Otsutsuki. And this is the same for a couple of other clans in Naruto, where they, more so than some of the other ones, by virtue of like literally sort of almost carrying an Otsutsuki power onwards to this day, have really, really direct lineage to Otsutsukis. And because the ability doesn't work on Otsutsukis, the characters who show the most connection to Otsutsuki also wouldn't be connected. That's one that makes sense, given that the Otsutsuki limitation is there from a kind of power perspective, I suppose. These abilities don't work on similarly powerful kind of people / quote-unquote family members, and for similar reasons, we assume it probably is the case here. Beyond that, like the speculation that people have had about other examples, like what if it's not the Uchiha thing just by virtue of her being an Uchiha? Why is she immune? People have brought up the idea, is it because she loves Boruto, who is an Otsutsuki, that overrides some sort of attempt to manipulate her? That seems a little bit weird, but because Ada is involved and her arc is about kind of romance, I wouldn't rule out the idea about that, but I still lean more towards the Uchiha heritage theory than anything, because I think it just feels like a cleaner example of all of this. So Sarda, very important. Sumire is, I have it here as all but confirmed to be immune from this as well, because obviously a bunch of chapters ago we learned that both Sarda and Sumire were immune from Ada's charm. Now, in this chapter, we only saw a tiny bit of Sumire. So they haven't come back around to really confirm that she also is immune from this. But we assume, because they did it before, she probably will also be immune to this as well. Otherwise, why would you set it up in that way? And I think it makes sense. I think you need to have at least a couple of characters being able to do stuff, kind of having to hide undercover in the village, and she could work quite well in that regard. And again, as for why is she immune, this is where you go back to the whole Nue kind of ability and everything that happened to her from her like origin kind of story arc. Her techniques and abilities ultimately stem back to Otsutsuki and Senju connections. So that's, I think, the reasoning on her side of things for why she might be immune. Otherwise, no clue. You could also make the point here that she also maybe has the whole love thing going on with maybe Boruto, but we don't really know for sure. Sasuke, I have down here as should be immune, but clearly in the chapter pictured for now with those affected. So the thing with him is that he is full Uchiha, whereas Sarada is actually only like half Uchiha. So why is she immune, but Sasuke is maybe up in the air? I feel that they're purposefully hiding the whole Sasuke thing from the audience. Like, they're just like being like, even if you read the chapter again, you'll note that they just have Sasuke react and they don't really have him say anything. So they're keeping exactly what's going on with him a little bit secret. So definitely he's one to keep an eye on, because I think it makes sense that he either is immune or is one of the first people to maybe break out of this on his own somehow. And he will eventually be revealed to be free from this kind of illusion that's basically going on here, the memory alteration. And again, I think that makes sense for Boruto, because he's Boruto's sensei, Boruto's mentor. You have to involve him in things somewhere, because obviously I think we know basically that like Boruto ends up with like Sasuke's sword, I believe. So a few of those little bits and pieces still need to happen, and that would involve Sasuke being involved here. Code. So I have probably not affected. Now, the reasoning for Code would be that, one, he has a Shinjutsu. That we know that the claw mark is actually a Shinjutsu ability. So if, kind of using similar logic to maybe like Demon, where like he's not Otsutsuki but he has the kind of Otsutsuki power thing, that might be one reason why he's immune. But as many people pointed out, the likely reason he's not affected by it is that he was likely in a different dimension when the big event actually happened. The way they showed this was that this was basically a big energy wave that spread out and affected like the entire planet. And so if you're not on the planet, how could you be affected by this? That's, I think, the point that's being made here. If he literally was not affected by the power activating, it shouldn't affect him. So he was in the dimension, likely in the dimension where the Ten Tails is being held, which is some other dimension. We don't know the exact details on it. So that would explain why Code is not affected by this. But we will discuss a little bit later on, perhaps, does it mean much if Code is or isn't affected, given what his motivations are and how he views Boruto and Kawaki. I have Naruto and Hinata here, and there's very similar reasons here. Probably not affected, for the same reason. They are both also in a different dimension, and specifically a dimension where time has stopped. And because the ability that like affects, that made this all happen, like spread out over a period of time across the world, if you're separate from time, how could it affect you? Then also you still have the idea of, well, Naruto's an Uzumaki, and that's another clan that kind of stems back to Otsutsuki stuff. And for Hinata, you have that she is a Hyuga clan. So are they immune by that? Because like the Byakugan, as we know, is quite important to many Otsutsuki. And so that's a pretty direct one very clearly. But the dimension thing, I think, matters more for these characters than the whole heritage thing. But the point is, if they're ever brought out of the dimension, they are not under the same spell that most of the other characters are. Himawari is fascinating. It's unclear for now, but you'd probably say unclear, but we assume affected, at least for now. Again, the whole clan lineage thing comes up here. She's part Uzumaki and Hyuga. You also, I think, have to bring up Demon's like odd statements about her, that like he senses some sort of a potential or power in her that no one seems to know what's really going on. If she is affected, it does mean that it's an unusual situation where she would consider both Kawaki and Boruto as her brothers, but Boruto would be considered the new family addition. I'd be somewhat surprised if Himawari, upon finding out some of what happened, just gives up on Kawaki. So in the context of what's actually happening here, I'd be surprised if she is just hostile outwardly towards Boruto, given that he's being treated as Kawaki is now. So Himawari might be willing to help Boruto even if she is affected, but it would be interesting if she's not. Amado is probably one of the most interesting characters, and that we definitely have to come back around to. I have should be affected, and it's probably the case, but people are still very suspicious. There are still a lot of questions about Amado that are unanswered and stuff like that. And basically what I'm referring to here is that many have suspicions about him due to his contact with Shibai's remains and how he made many of the series' most powerful characters. That, you know, the reason Demon has his Shinjutsu, the reason Ada has omnipotence, and the reason Demon has his ability is because, as far as we're aware, Amado put those abilities in them. How could he do that? Based on what we were told before, Shibai's kind of like earthly remains contained some aspects of his powers, and so the implication seems to be that, I guess, Ishiki somehow had the remains or some of the remains of Shibai, and he gave them to Amado for research, and Amado made Ada, Demon, and all the other kind of cyborgs with these abilities. And that feels crazy, the idea that, like, he's obviously this elite level scientist that is vastly above everyone else, and he was literally able to transplant the godlike ability, omnipotence, into a character. What does that mean? You know, there's a few questions about, like, you know, does he have his own, like, ability he may be implanted in himself, which could potentially grant him immunity? There's so much to consider with that. But the more interesting thing is, he is probably the character where, if he is affected, his sort of like view of Boruto and Kawaki kind of changes things a little bit, because if he is affected, he interestingly would then consider Boruto as the person he needs to revive his daughter, Akebi, which, given that his main motivator is to get his daughter back, may give Boruto a surprise ally in Amado, because they directly set up in the last chapter, before the switch around happened, that you were having the scene with Shikamaru and Amado, and Amado was getting a bit angry that Shikamaru was basically telling him that if we feel that we have to, we might have to kill Kawaki, and he was getting frustrated, like he's losing control of the situation. But now that the switch has happened, it's Boruto who's technically the one he's saving, but saving someone who actually theoretically can't do what he needs to. Now, there is some weirdness about it, because of course the kind of implication is that, like, because Kawaki's karma can't be used for resurrection, that's why it can work. But it could theoretically still work if done by Boruto, but we'll see what exactly happens here, because either it's Amado is just a normal person who's just deeply cares about bringing his daughter back, or there's a lot more going on that we still don't know about. Hard to say. I'll bring up Kashin Koji here, even though he hasn't been in the story for quite a while, but I'm guessing should be affected because he escaped from the battle with Ishiki via Summoning Toad. This would suggest he is maybe at Mount Miyaboku, which, as far as I'm aware, is just a place on the planet. It is not another dimension. It's just a very hard place to get to. And it's the same for the cave where you can potentially get snake sage from, and the forest with the slugs, which I don't think we know a lot about, if there is necessarily a slug sage mode type thing. They're also places on the planet. They're just unexplored, hard to get to. So he should be impacted if the jutsu or whatever affected the entire planet. But there's probably some stuff we don't know about him, and who knows specifically where he went to. I'm just speculating he went to Mount Miyaboku because he seemed to escape via reverse summoning with the toad. So I don't know, that's up in the air. But I think Kashin Koji, if they're not going to necessarily do anything with Sasuke, I think people are thinking that the Jiraiya clone might train Boruto. And as far as I'm aware, like, Kashin Koji, like, I'm struggling to remember, like, what was his view on Kawaki, which, if he is affected, would be how he then views Boruto if he was to meet him going forward. I don't think he had any issue with Kawaki, and I guess maybe considered that he was just being used. So, I don't know. There's certainly a chance to see something happen here. And then Shikamaru is the only character who we know for sure absolutely is affected. I just mention it here because he was able to somewhat strongly resist Ada's charm. So perhaps he is one of the few characters initially who has a chance of breaking free of the omnipotence. However, they're planning to do that sort of thing, because thinking longer term into the future, we're eventually going to have to reverse this, because I don't think there's any way we're just sticking with the idea that everyone remembers Boruto and Kawaki completely differently. So either we have to individually snap everyone out of it through different means, or we have to reverse this at its source as a giant single event. How exactly do we do that? That's what we're kind of thinking about. But anyway, so what do they need to do in chapter 80? So straight away, I think we do need some clarification about the characters who may or may not be affected. So I think this is where, Sumire probably should be confirmed either way. Sasuke, they should begin to set up whatever they're planning to do with him, and maybe even Amado. And I would probably include Code in here as well, just to make that very, very clear to the audience what the situation is here. Because I'm assuming there are going to be a couple of edge cases of characters who are or are not affected because of maybe slightly odd reasons that we don't particularly know about. But, some stuff like that does need to get clarified. So we don't need to keep constant track of lists and theories about all the characters like this. But anyway, then we have to talk about Boruto. So Boruto has had his world completely switched around here. But we know he has to escape. To get to the flash forward scene, it means we have to get to time skip. He has to, I suppose, survive all of that time. And we assume that that is not constantly always being on the run. At some point, something has to happen here where Boruto properly gets away and Kawaki can't get to him anytime soon. So what's going to happen here to make this happen? How does he escape, and what does he escape to? What is Boruto actually going to be doing over the course of the time skip? He has to do some sort of sense of training, but who can train him? Sasuke, Kashin Koji come to mind as really obvious examples where we assume something's going to happen with Sasuke in the coming chapters relating to confirming is he immune or not, and then they've been setting up for quite a while now that he needs to play a big role in something. Kashin Koji, I think, probably is due to make his return anytime soon after what happened, and he has been gone for quite a while now. And I just mentioned just for the sake of covering everything. Toneri might be important, because if we do begin to bring the Jogan into play, because keep in mind, the last episode of the anime before we ended for part 1 of the anime, we're on break for 6 months or so now with the anime. They did tease the Jogan right at the end in sort of an anime original scene, highlighting that this is an important thing. So when is the manga going to properly address the Jogan? It very clearly offers the chance for Boruto to surprise people with something that would allow him to escape and sort of change his destiny to a certain degree. And of course, if you remember the anime from the earlier episodes, it was Toneri who was the one who basically told Boruto that the eye, that secret eye, the Jogan, is a very, very important thing. And it's sort of the almost opposite of the Momoshiki vision of the future, in a way, that the eyes will take everything from you. Your future is bad, to no, these eyes will save the future type thing. So, I don't know. We of course know Toneri was frozen in time for 10,000 years by Urashiki, but if Boruto gets to the moon somehow, maybe the Jogan could free Toneri from that, and Toneri could help him. That could be something, but it's probably a big stretch to do that. But we do need to introduce other Otsutsuki characters, because Kawaki's goal is to eliminate all Otsutsukis. And at the moment, the only Otsutsuki characters are himself, Kawaki, and Boruto. And so there's a need to have more involved. So that's the kind of big point here. Technically, we know that there is still, I think, one part of the flash forward scene that we saw just a few chapters ago about the incident, which is that Shikadai and his team have to catch up with Boruto, and we get the scene of this is not what friends do. Now, I don't know how significant of a scene or not that one is going to be, but I suppose it speaks to the idea that in Boruto trying to escape, he is confronted by, I guess, a couple of other characters, including a scene with Shikadai. So I don't know if that's going to be too much of a significant scene, or if it was maybe just more significant as the teaser when we got it a few chapters ago. But it speaks to the idea that I guess Boruto tries to run away and perhaps is even let to get away, because this is actually probably a key question as well. What is going to be the new, what do I have, statue there, status quo in the village? Because, you know, like I say here, sure, Kawaki has flipped the script, but he's just treated as Boruto now. It's not like Kawaki has been made the new Hokage. It's not like he is suddenly in charge of absolutely everything going on right now. Yes, if he wants to. He is the character with the power in the village to accomplish what he wants. But technically, he is not the leader of the village. Now, depending on what they do with Ada or not, technically Kawaki working with Ada can control the entire village, because Ada can of course get people effectively on her side to work for her, and so if Kawaki just does that, that is an important kind of thing. Now, has that charming power potentially been affected by the fact that she has now used omniscience in this sort of quote-unquote correct way? That's something that will have to be kind of interesting to see here, is that, you know, Ada, now that she's maybe used the power properly, does it turn off this sort of latent version of it that just kind of leaks out, which is what the charming power was actually revealed to be, that the through her and what she wants and the minor control she had over that ability, it leaked out in the form of, you know, she wants a romantic relationship, so anyone who's affected by it is attracted to her, because that's what she always wants. That's her making her will a reality. And this was her making Kawaki's will a reality. Now, the whole how it actually happened is a rather complicated situation, because yes, Kawaki was more or less alluding to the idea of, you know, in a way, why does it have to be him? Why does Boruto have to be the one Otsutsuki right here to kill? Why do I have to kill my own brother? Why could he not just be this nobody? And obviously, Ada looks inside of him and sees that this is true. Inadvertently, I guess, or purposely activates her powers in some way, and makes what seems like almost like her interpretation of what she saw within Kawaki a reality, which made them flip sides. Notably, it didn't immediately, it doesn't, even reading it again, Kawaki never fully states that this is what he wants, that he wants to switch places with Boruto. He just wants it so that Boruto was not, you know, someone ultimately relatively important to him. Why couldn't the person who had an Otsutsuki inside them just be a random person? Maybe this is just some inner part of him that he wishes he was in a more important position, and this is the real truth behind how he actually views the whole connection with Naruto. But notably, out loud at least, he didn't say that this switch was directly what he wanted. So I don't know, is this just some weird, it's half Ada's interpretation of it, half Kawaki's interpretation, maybe some of which he didn't voice himself, but that is the way has actually played out. So, you know, Kawaki is left in a situation where, to keep the status quo going, to keep himself safe, he has to play the role of Boruto within the village, in that he doesn't just have free reign to kind of go wherever he wants necessarily. But will the village decide to go after Code? This is probably the main thing in terms of like something that Kawaki wants to do, that he will need to get to eventually. That is maybe take out Code, because Code is still here. We have to do something with Code. So, you know, that's an interesting one to see. It's just like, is Kawaki going to try and take over, command the village, or will he just be somewhat set in terms of just like seeing how things kind of play out from here? Speaking of Code, affected by the switch or not, his plans are, for the most part, really unaffected. Like, how he views Boruto and Kawaki, or if he views them as being flipped, it doesn't change too much given what he wants. Like, he needs to use one or the other as his vessel. His deal with Ada is over, so the character who Ada likes doesn't really mean much to him anymore, but there is still maybe the slight implication that Code truly actually does like Ada, so he might still want to factor that in, which would actually make it so that it's a weird situation where Code would not want to attack Boruto, because Boruto is Kawaki effectively to him at that point. So I don't know. That's a frustrating situation, because it obviously places Code more into conflict with Ada, because he'd be targeting Kawaki thinking it's Boruto and all this sort of stuff. But personally, Code himself hates Ishiki's true vessel, which is Kawaki, which is now Boruto in his mind, if it's affected. Again, I don't really think in reflection he is reflected. It has impacted him. I think he will just know what exactly is going on here. But will he be able to use this to his advantage at all? Because he wants to attack the village when it's like unprotected, when Ada isn't there. But is that going to happen anytime soon and stuff like that? I don't really know. Because all we know is that I think when the flash forward scene happens, something happens in the village. And that's interesting. So is it because of Code or not? I don't really know. So there's that. And then, yeah, the unaffected characters obviously at this point become hugely important for where we're going in the series. So, Sarada, for now, as being the only known ally of Boruto's in all of this, is of huge importance. And you kind of wonder, like, are they going to get a scene together to plan things out, to, I suppose, Boruto to bring Sarada up to speed on, like, this is what has happened. What should Sarada do? Should she stay in the village? Should she go with Boruto? That's still an open possibility. We assume Boruto perhaps is more on his own for the time skip and only comes back into things later, which would suggest that Sarada stays, quote-unquote, undercover in the village, acting as if she has been affected by the switch. But, that's the thing. We ultimately need to find a way to either snap everyone out of the omnipotence switch or reverse it in full. And it likely requires the unaffected characters to stay undercover in the village, meaning it's not overly likely that Boruto will have others with him when he escapes. So, Sarada and Sumire have obviously been set up so far as the defense against Ada. The only ones potentially able to kill her if required. So, I assume the next chapter or something like that will reveal Sumire is also unaffected also. Part of me feels that, like, they'll maybe have one of these characters go with Boruto. I have a feeling Sarada will stay in the village, but that would mean maybe Sumire goes with Boruto, which I'm not sure if the setup is there for. So I don't know, either way, they might both stay there, especially because I suppose Ada is going to view them as being like her gal pals, basically. That was the setup from that chapter a few chapters ago. I assume they probably have to keep these two together to keep in Ada's trust. So they're there, ready to act when maybe Boruto makes his big grand return and the situation leans more in their favor to reverse things. And this gets into the question of, ultimately, are the characters going to be able to snap other characters out of the omnipotence? As in, if say Sarada and Sumire talk to, say, Shikamaru and begin to point out that you're talking to this guy here, you view this guy as being the Hokage's son, and this is what you know about that character. Well, what about this, this, and this, which clearly aren't the case and really can't be the case? Like, the character you think that this is usually wears these clothing, where, as you can see, this is the case. And then there's also situations where, like, there's family pictures from before Kawaki, the person who looks like Kawaki, ever came to the village. So how are they affected? Has omnipotence literally also changed physical stuff like that, where the family pictures have changed, so it's actually like a young Kawaki with Naruto and Hinata? Otherwise, like, stuff like that would be clear examples that would have people doubt their minds on things. So this is where, like, obviously, if Sasuke is affected, you assume him and Shikamaru would be characters who you might be able to snap out of it. And I think maybe that's what they're going to do in these few chapters, is have Sarada and Sumire maybe work to just snap a few key characters out of it. And so if we have maybe the team of Sarada, Sumire, Shikamaru, and Sasuke as like, these are our 4 agents that we're capable of using in the village, that's at least a solid group. Now, we're going to have to get into the situation where, like, are they going to do some sort of a thing where, like, say the Uchihas can use their Sharingans or Mangekyo Sharingans or whatever to, like, almost like genjutsu overwrite the omnipotence so they remember things in the right way? Is there going to be some sort of like weird interaction like that? Or are we ultimately setting up the idea that the only way to properly reverse this is for the characters to almost like capture Ada and maybe have Boruto force Ada to use omnipotence through me as the Otsutsuki kind of like medium, and my will is to reverse what was done? Like that's the obvious solution, but can we do other stuff like in the meantime, is the kind of real question. Because the implication is that Ada can't just use this ability on her own. It worked that time because she was like kind of basically touching Kawaki, and like basically the full power of Otsutsuki finally happened. So yeah, Shikamaru, Sasuke are the main candidates to probably be immune or snap out of it themselves. I get the feeling Sasuke will be immune, but that's just being hidden from us. He has to play a key role in this as Boruto's mentor, having missed out during the arc where Boruto was killed, which we just saw in the anime. And obviously we had after that then the idea that he literally says to Boruto, you know, like, I'll be there next time, more or less. So there's a reason people have been having sort of quote unquote the death flags for Sasuke for a while now, is that we're waiting for something even bigger to happen. Amado, like I've been talking about before, suddenly becomes very fascinating because, you know, he doesn't like the idea that the village is planning to kill Kawaki if they can't get him back on side. Post-switch, this means he's concerned about them killing Boruto, and he believes Boruto can bring Akebi back. And he's also key because of the shut-off command, which I believe was referenced in Chapter 79 again. And I think they revealed that for a reason, which is that with literally just a couple of key characters, they can shut down like Ada and Kawaki. Like if they just like use, I suppose, Sumire and Sarada to take control of Ada, and then have Amado in front of Kawaki, you can shut down Kawaki and use Ada as you kind of need to, I guess. That's maybe the kind of simplistic version of how you actually fix things, but we don't really know what the whole Amado situation is. This is probably one of the key things to be on the lookout for in the next chapter is Amado affected or not? Himawari is of interest because they're at the same time teasing an important role for her with the demon scene, but then not really showing a lot of her to us from like the last couple of chapters. They showed one really quick scene of her at the house, and I suppose the implication is that she finds out that her parents are missing, gone, or whatever, and then she wasn't in the last chapter as far as I'm aware. So what are they going to do with that? What did that scene with Demon actually mean? What is this unique power that he seems to sense in her? Does it relate to maybe her potential immunity to all of this? And then if she is affected, I don't think she would ever give up on like her newly kind of adopted brother, which would now be how she maybe views Boruto. So there's still a chance for her to help. I think Himawari would be interesting if maybe she was one of the characters they maybe got around to having it either be revealed that she is immune or she manages to break out of it herself. Again, because she has the Byakugan and is a Hyuga plus Uzumaki, a lot of that stuff would make sense. But I'm wondering what exactly we're doing here, because this is the other thing. Okay, sure, you have counters to Ada perhaps, potentially for Kawaki with the Amado shut-off command, but do you have a counter for Demon? And so far the answer is no, because let's not forget, Demon has been presented as being the most powerful combatant in the series because of how crazy his ability is. the ability to effectively reflect any violent intent towards him. And obviously the idea is that the more powerful a character gets, the more potential they maybe have to defeat Demon, but the more potential for a insane backlash that there actually is. So Himawari seems to almost be presented as being the one weakness perhaps that is there for Demon. So is she meant to be viewed as being the counter to Demon if we're going to involve things in that way? And then the final point here is just really this. How many chapters are there going to be until the time skip? I've definitely seen a few people, and my initial thoughts would be the same, which is that I think we're going to get the next volume. So we'll get chapter 80, 81, 82, and 83. Next 4 chapters, and we end on the time skip just about to happen. Now, whether you do that in a way where basically that would mean that chapter 84 is the start of the time skip, or post-time skip, or whatever, that would be interesting, because it doesn't feel like we can stay here for ages. Like, I'd be shocked if we're still here like 10 chapters from now waiting for the time skip to happen, because it feels like we're just in a situation where like either like the village has to capture Boruto right now, or he gets away because of some really quick series of events that end up happening. And I think it has to work out that way, where it is just a quick sequence of events that kind of switches things up to allow Boruto to hide out and all this stuff happen. And like I said, it feels like a lot of what you have to do is just establish what's going on in the village, what's Code doing, and then get Boruto to safety somehow. So yeah, Boruto eventually, I guess, has to hide out and train, prepare for a plan to turn the tables, suggest some, I think this is probably something that might happen. Boruto somehow find a way to have a communication with some of the immune characters, but that gets complicated because Ada has the power to see everything. That's the important thing here as well, is that like Boruto can't almost, because that he effectively can't have a secret communication because of the way Ada is. And the same goes for a lot of plotting and planning. Ada will see it if anyone pretty much does it. So the only way to avoid that, it seems like, is the only kind of communication that she can sense, as far as we're aware, is stuff like Momoshiki talking to Boruto, which by itself is a little bit of an interesting topic, in that Momoshiki seems happy to witness Boruto's kind of him go through this kind of torturous experience. But it's still his vessel that is keeping his kind of spirit alive inside. So what is Momoshiki's kind of end goal now? That effectively Boruto has lost everything, but it's not particularly helping Momoshiki at all. So does he just want to see Boruto suffer? Or he's got to be like, oh, I've had my fun now. Now let me help you accomplish what you need to do. Here's some really interesting stuff, or whatever. That's what's so odd and unique about Momoshiki going forward, is that we assume for the most part that like there could be still more of the lose everything to come. But based on what was said in the last chapter, it feels like it has happened already. So Momoshiki going forward will be fascinating to see. And then, Kawaki as well. Like, how intent on accomplishing what he has to do will this be? In that, it's worked out in his favor to sort of protect him the way it's worked out. But in terms of what he truly wanted, which was almost like truly making the person who the Otsutsuki is inside, like, not his brother anymore, that's not exactly what has happened here. Kawaki killing Boruto at this point would still be Kawaki killing the person he views as being his brother. So it doesn't like alleviate him of that like emotion that he has. So Kawaki must have complicated feelings on even how it's worked out, even if it has worked out in his favor. So I think there's still maybe a little bit of development with regards to where exactly Kawaki is as the kind of series villain at this point. But they're my thoughts on everything going into this chapter. There might be one or two kind of smaller things in the background that I may be forgetting about, but for now, I think that's where we're at. I'm pretty excited for this. I don't think there's any way where the chapter can just be like disappointing. Like, unless they just get back into that trend of just the page count not being used very well and just spinning our wheels here. But I think we're at such an important point in the story where I think they'll just have to be able to use each page, effectively, because I think there's quite a lot of information to communicate, whereas other times it's maybe felt like they haven't been able to fully flesh out a chapter because they don't necessarily have the content. I think they have the content here because this has brought, like, say, Sarada more heavily into the story, Sumire, these other characters, as well as the key characters who have always been a focus. Now, there's other characters also still in play, so important stuff. But in the comments, let me know what your thoughts are heading into Boruto Chapter 80, coming in 18 days. So let me know that below, but that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.